Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on the subject of the Open Geospatial Consortium and activities pertaining to AR. I'm Christine Perret, the leader of the AREA Interoperability and Standards program, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about that in just a moment. I want to welcome everybody and tell you that this webinar is being recorded. It'll be available as an archive on the AREA website. All attendees are in listen-only mode, and I would invite you to put any questions you may have into the console, the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will be answering those questions at the end after George's talk. So today's agenda briefly is I'll introduce the Interoperability and Standards programs, the goals and how we're achieving those. Then I'll turn it over to George Percival. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Engineer of the Open Geospatial Consortium. And at the end, we'll take any questions you may have. So just to remind you, the AREA is in the business of developing the AR ecosystem, more specifically, the ecosystem of companies that provide and use enterprise augmented reality. So the enterprises are at the top of this small pyramid, really driving the use to improve performance, reduce risks of all different kinds. And the enterprises are gradually becoming more and more aware of the capabilities that are available in AR systems and services. Supporting the enterprises are the providers of technologies and many non-commercial entities. So the providers of products and services that make augmented reality experiences possible, displays, of course, authoring tools, tracking technologies, and the sort, and non-commercial entities, including universities and standards development organizations in some cases. So together we're really building this ecosystem, and the AREA does that through sharing thought leadership content through its websites, also by attending conferences and events, organizing our own events for networking and to support good business practices. We also have a goal or aspire to support more training programs that will produce more enterprise AR professionals. We could do that in a variety of ways, and we hope that that's going to be a gap we can help close in the future. And then finally, we want to reduce the barriers to adoption through our committees. And I chair the research committee, and through the research committee, I discovered that there were a lot of people interested in interoperability and standards. And we're starting to feel the pain of proprietary technology silos. And so we like to present this using a visual that we developed some years ago within the AREA to describe customer needs in the domain of augmented reality. And as you can see, we start at the highest level with industries for whom AR has a high impact, the kinds of settings and context and the business drivers, finally getting down to the use cases kind of in the middle of this figure. Now, from the use cases, we can develop requirements and then solutions. And what we're getting, the signal that we're getting from the industry is that many times providers as well as enterprise customers need to integrate multi-vendor solutions. They want to be able to mix and match components or hardware, and they don't want to have a big investment in custom engineering or custom software to make these solutions effective in their unique settings. That includes, by the way, companies that are developing displays and that may want to use chipsets from different suppliers and so forth. So that's one direction from which we sense the need for interoperability and standards. And then the other one is the large enterprises and the systems integrators who partner and provide services to them that need to integrate a lot of the operational systems that are in their IT departments and managed by IT, so that they can use and reuse enterprise assets and that are already been monetized and have been amortized by the customer. So these are two different but complementary directions that drive the need for interoperability. So we started this program in 2019 to increase the knowledge about interoperability and how to get there. And then on the other hand, to support the standards development organizations and open source projects, perhaps, through our activities and the member feedback, and to develop these policies and procedures to support interaction between AREA members and standards development organizations. So those are the goals, and this is how we get there. We're developing thought leadership content, including webinars like today's. We like to support standards development organizations through requirements identification, giving feedback to draft specifications, and getting our members involved at all levels of that process if possible. On occasion, we can co-organize and conduct events. In fact, on March 5th in Munich, we'll be conducting a full-day workshop on the subject of interoperability and augmented reality. We'll have several speakers coming and presenting about those standards organizations. Unfortunately, no one from the Open Geospatial Consortium will be able to attend. So this webinar serves as a way to provide information without having an OGC staff member in person. And then in the future, when there are suitable standards, then members will be encouraged to test or build reference implementations. So that's my introduction about the AREA Interoperability and Standards program. And now I'd like to turn this over to George. And just a second, it's going to take me a minute to get there. George, I just want to make sure we can hear you clearly. Can you speak to me?
Thank you for that introduction, Christine. Appreciate that.
Okay.
You can hear me?
You should be able to show your slides. Hear you perfectly, yes.
And you should now be able to see slides.
We sure do. Thank you very much.
And I'll go into presenter mode to maximize it, right? Maybe. There we go. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Christine. Thank you to the AREA for providing this webinar series of webinars, and in particular for the opportunity to speak about the Open Geospatial Consortium and activities pertaining to augmented reality. I'll speak a little bit about the consortium, about the OGC's activities in augmented reality, set a setting, give a setting, if you will, as to kind of where we're at here at the beginning of 2020. And then I'll push into specific set of standards that are most relevant to AR and AR content, and in particular, augmented reality, considering geospatial aspects. So living in the world, walking around, seeing cities, all of that geospatial content, getting that into an augmented reality experience is kind of the perspective of why the standards that I chose that I'm going to show you. And then finish off with, where do we go next? I certainly am looking forward to your questions and discussions after the slides here. So, okay, so OGC, it's a consortium. Consortium about 525 organizations, a third government, a third research and universities, and a third commercial. A third of those 500 are in Europe, a third are in North America, and a third around the globe. And we're all about making location more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We're a not-for-profit consortium that advances and focuses on innovation of that kind of technology. We do that through communities, and in particular in different technology market domains. We have quite a few partnerships and alliances, for example, here with the augmented reality community. That's key. We don't build a set of standards in a vacuum. We want to make sure that they are consistent and work with others. You'll see how that plays out here in the presentation. And I'll speak to you about our processes for standards and innovation. So if you've heard anything, the most popular thing with respect to OGC standards is a set of standards called OGC Web Services, which are Web Map Service, Web Map Tile Service, Web Feature Service, Web Coverage Service. They're deployed around the globe. Millions of geospatial data sets are online, operationally available using OGC Web Services. There's a couple 100,000 servers that provide those web services. We have a variety of encodings in ARML, too, in particular, KML, GeoPackage, GeoTIFF, NetCDF, HDF, GML, all the varieties of GML. And we address a variety of domains of geospatial information, attempted to depict that with the graphics that kind of surround this. So that's kind of our deployed operational baseline. How did we get there and how do we move forward? We have a set of programs within OGC. The innovation program is focused on running code. It's a set of test beds, prototypes, pilots, sprints, where running code wins. Then the standards program, which is consensus-oriented, consensus wins. And so a variety of working groups, both for discussion as well as standards developments, that lead into our technical and planning committees in the standards program, where we vet and vote the adopted standards. Compliance program, there's a test harness out there. Anybody can test against using that test harness against the adopted standards. If you want to be certified compliant, and I urge you to become certified compliant, that is the extra seal that certifies that you've in fact met the standard. And we have communication and outreach. So that kind of gives you a background on OGC as a consortium, as a standards and innovation activity, as a prototyping and standards activity. So let's shift into the kind of scene setting with respect to augmented reality. And so go back a couple of years ago. First multi-vendor AR open interoperability demonstration. This is something Christine's leadership was very crucial in. We brought together Wikitude, Layar, and Genio. All of those are all different names now. At the time they had 50 million users, and they all implemented ARML2, encoded that, showed, as you see in these graphics, the same content in their different apps, overlaying content on the picture of reality coming through the device. It was Mobile World Congress in 2014, and so there was a lot of excitement that we had really broken through on AR, that we had achieved something. We had, right? I mean, the smartphones had allowed us to do something we've never done before. I think we could all agree, though, that we had entered a kind of a phase of not a whole lot of growth after that, and so I was, in preparing for this workshop, looked at an AREA publication recently that I think it was a tweet or some story from AREA that focused on this study, and talked about the nuclear winter of VR and pilot purgatory of AR. Wow, that's kind of dismal, but I think the positive message here is that 2020 is poised to be a breakthrough year for mixed reality. I certainly see that from our perspective. In particular, in OGC, we conduct a technology forecasting activity. We do a broad survey of technology trends, we assess those, and then we take focus and take action on those. Augmented reality has been a key one that has come across in the landscape studies that we do. This Explorer is online, and it's hooked into a set of results. It's an interesting Explorer. It just came out, just released in the last few weeks. So actually, I'm looking for people to go bang on it before it gets too crazy. But you can go here and put in your terminology and find out the relationship of your concepts in the geospatial domain based upon 100,000 artifacts that have been put through this AI, natural learning, natural language processing technique and the 1300 dimensional space, a wonderful product that we've worked with Big Knowledge to get online. So we took that. We took a set of words that comes out of Wikipedia for augmented reality, put that into the Explorer and identified the focus area of immersive technology, AR, VR, XR, and the related technologies that go along with that. And based on this and a variety of other analysis, augmented reality is a priority trend for OGC in 2020. And so we're going to build on, for example, this Summit and Hackathon, AR Summit and Hackathon that happened in Toulouse, France, November 2019, organized. It was associated with an OGC Standards Program Technical Committee. So there was a summit there that brought together really world-class research and demonstration of standards relating to AR. There was also a hackathon hosted by AREA that advanced the implementation of that. And so some really good results and discussions that were had there. For example, Immersive Web for Enterprise at the AR Summit, AREA and W3C content was presented. Etsy presented a draft AR architecture at the summit. Muriel Chanel, the chairman of the ARF, ISGRF, present a variety of things, including this diagram to kind of give us a set of components that allow us to position and discuss standards relative to this technology environment. So in a moment, you'll see me place the OGC standards in the context of this diagram. Etsy's done some really good landscape work, as have others. This report was in particular mentioned at the summit, and I happened to go look at that and find a variety of standards that are listed in there. Good job with respect to Etsy pulling out quite a few of the OGC standards that are relevant to AR. And so I use that as one basis for the discussion of the standards in OGC that are relevant to AR. So that's kind of a scene setting. This is the discussion, the transition to the discussion about what OGC standards are relevant in an AR context. So in some ways, this is an agenda for the next section of the talk. I'll actually start with ARML 2, which you see down below, which relates to the Etsy component diagrams around interactive contents, how you bring this material together and put it into a rendering engine. 3D visualization is key. We'll talk about I3S and 3D tiles. 3D tile, both of those make use of a really important technology called GLTF that comes from Chronos. You'll see down below, world knowledge is the database diagram, the database icon that Etsy has defined there. OGC brings a lot to world knowledge. Our remit in life is to make that information accessible. And so I'll talk in particular about a set of standards, City GML, Indoor GML, and moving features that are encodings for bringing geospatial features, world knowledge, in an encoding syntactically and semantically rich way and making those accessible. The APIs then, both the newly developing OGC APIs as well as sensor things is a way to access that world knowledge and bring it into an AR context for rendering. So a lot of content. If you're looking for content, that's where you can find a lot of the content. And then lastly, I'll talk about GeoPose. GeoPose is a standards working group, which we've just begun. And it's a group activity, quite a few organizations involved. OGC anticipates, has now chartered a group to define a standard around a GeoPose 6 degree of freedom in the geospatial coordinate reference spaces that I think will be very valuable to many applications. So this is the agenda. Let's push into that with respect to the order. The other item that I want to make mention of is the split that you see here between the two. The top 5 bullets are all things that are adopted and have implementations and are in update and maintenance, as well as new features, either with a minor revision or a major revision. All of those top 5, the 5 there on the top, are in that status. The OGC API suite of standards is under development. It is developed to eventually take the place of the OGC Web Services. It's a set of APIs. Only one of those standards is approved right now, and we, over the course of 2020, anticipate many more of those to be adopted, led by implementations through sprints, and the GeoPose, which is just getting started, and I'll speak more about that. So ARML 2. ARML 2 was, built back 2014 based upon those experience of those browsers, AR browsers. And the key thing to take away from ARML 2, from my perspective, is the 3 main concepts that come out of there, separating the notion of features, visual assets, and anchors. There's a generic model that goes into detail on that. And this actually, the text that's on this slide is from that ETSI report. I think they did a very good job of reading the ARML standard and identifying the key topics that, from a standards point of view of bringing knowledge based upon experience to the marketplace, ARML has those main concepts. I think ARML 2 reached a peak and is not as used as widely as it was, say, in 2015 and the like. Part of that's the XML serialization part, but the object model and the concepts behind it are that standards working group did an excellent job to get the nugget, the key aspects of ARML rendering and objects and the concepts behind that. And so you can go to that spec. It's online, it's open, it's all freely available. All OGC standards are freely available. So that's ARML 2. I spoke about world knowledge, and in particular world knowledge modeling then, right? So OGC is about geospatial information. That's, kind of GIS and the large maps and the like. Probably more relevant, is more of the urban modeling that is a real feature of OGC standards at this point. OGC has worked with the built environment community, the BIM IFC communities, so that you can get that content of the built environment readily available through urban models, which are reduced amount of content over a BIM model, right? You don't need to know all of the building construction information when you render an AR diagram or AR view, but you do need kind of the level of information that you see in some of these graphics. And not only do you need those graphics, but you need the semantics that go along with them. So our models fit between the very detailed BIM models and the 3D visualization with no semantic content that exists. These world knowledge models, in order to support these applications that you see listed in the bullet items, and I suggest to you those are also relevant to AR, providing not just a visual, but the semantic information of what's being looked at in that 3D space. So what are the standards that go along with this? City GML, urban model, great story about how it was developed in Berlin during the reconstruction of Berlin. After the wall fell down, Berlin received a lot of investment to rebuild the city physically, and at the same time they said, we need a virtual twin of the city, and they didn't have an encoding model to do that, and so City GML was built at the same time as the real Berlin. And now it's built out. This was a few years ago, 500,000 buildings, but it's more than that now. It has become kind of the de facto required by European governments, European-wired Inspire, and around the globe as well. And Christine, I do see a video. That might be the size factor. So Japan has taken off quite in a big way. just had a really good workshop last week in Tokyo using City GML for urban modeling. And cities in the United States, in particular New York, you can get a robust City GML model for New York and other cities across the country. So that's City GML. That kind of gives you the exterior of the buildings with semantic content as well as visuals. Inside the building, we have OGC's Indoor GML. Not only gives you the representation of the geometries of the constructed items, but it also provides other semantic spaces like Wi-Fi and radio overlap so that you can map those out. And then it has got the mathematical rigor to go from those geometric spaces to the topological spaces, the navigation, what you need for navigation. So what you see in the graphic on the left is a 3D model with walls and doors and the like. How might you walk through that? How are they connected together? You see this other model of nodes and links that portrays that. And being able to go back and forth between those two with the mathematics of the Poincare duality is all built into the standards. So robust semantics, geometry, navigation is all built into Indoor GML, and so very robust with respect to the needs for AR in terms of both visual and navigation and semantics. Similar discussion. Oh, the key thing here is that depending upon your navigation mode and the state of the building, fire or no fire, don't take the elevator in a fire, you'll get different navigation information, and you can request that using the semantics of Indoor GML, and then you overlay it with the semantics of the radio space and knowing with the positioning and the localization that comes in with that. We just finished a pilot with respect to that, focused on first responders. Key thing here is to go from those 3D point clouds into vector formats. The next phase of this that's being planned will actually implement that into an augmented reality view. And so it's automated now to kind of on the back end to give you that navigations, and now heads-up display with AR is the key next step. Another feature of world knowledge in a geospatial context is time. So things move in time. They're not just buildings fixed in space with semantics, they actually move. And so how do you keep track of those? And of course, things like cell phones provide really good ways to track moving features. So we've got mobile objects that give us trajectories as moving features that are used in many applications. Very simple format for doing that because of the size of data that comes with moving features. It's JSON, CSV, and XML, but it gives you those trajectories of 2D or 3D rigid bodies. We're not talking about things that split and come together. They're essentially points that represent a rigid body, the position orientation of features in a global space over time. And so getting that information, you can do queries with respect to the space that you're in and looking at to see what has been through here, what's coming through here, what's currently here, and how to show that path, that trajectory in a visualization is key to have this moving features encoded. Okay, so we move to visualization. We have two key 3D visualization standards. The first one here is the indexed 3D scene layers. It is an OGC community standard brought to us by Esri. So Esri's turned over the intellectual property to OGC. All of our standards are free of any patents as we know them. They're all unencumbered with no licenses to use them. And so, for example, Esri has turned over a copyrighted version of I3S for us to baseline and make available. And it gives you this 3D visualization of objects, points, integrated meshes, and point clouds. So OGC community standard for that. The other one is 3D tiles, also an OGC community standard. Both of them support GLTF. 3D tiles makes that the heart of what they do. And so 3D Tiles puts spatial data structures in GLTF, adds styling, and adds metadata. So you get a GLTF file, object that is ready to be visualized in 3 dimensions, along with the APIs that go along with that for the GPU processing. So, closer to the silicon coming from Kronos. Kronos Group manages GLTF, and so you get the advantages of that GPU visualization, GPU processing to support 3D visualization with the spatial data structures. And so really amazing stuff happening around these standards. Pulled off one example. It's not a robust example, but it still gives you the idea that taking 3D tiles, taking a viewpoint and cutting out a hole in the ground virtually and sticking a pipe in that hole is exactly the kinds of things that lots of people are doing. When I started going and looking at the examples, the standards are really supportive of this. Best practices are where we're at with respect to this now. And so bringing those forward is the status of where we're at. So here you see one, superimpose 3D assets over a real terrain from a camera using 3D tiles. And key thing about GLTF then is that it comes, everywhere. It's so widely deployed, and the direction that Kronos is going to support AR and VR is key. And so with that, given 3D tiles based on GLTF is exciting with respect to content. Big ecosystem for 3D tiles in terms of content, visualization engines. We're developing a validator for that as well. Okay, so that was the world content, if you will. Getting a lot of data about the world, accessible in encoding formats. Now we'll speak of 2 API activities that give you information about the world, but it's an API-focused item. In particular, sensor things. Been around for a while, adopted standard. It's also an ITU technical spec. And so any IoT edge computing device kind of thing, the semantics associated with sensors associated with that, building on the existing OGC sensor web enablement standards that are deployed globally for operational sensor webs, about detecting sensors, being able to get the semantics of the sensors, being able to geolocate sensors. Excuse me. All of that's packed into a really lightweight sensor things API for sensor data management, analytics, command and control, event detection, notification. So pulling in real-time events into your AR view, the content, you can use sensor things for that on IoT devices. And OGC API standards. So I began the discussion with OGC Web Services, deployed around the globe, 50 million data sets, built about 20 years ago. And so it's showing its age with respect to the design practices that were used for OGC Web Services are no longer the in vogue best practices for web design. And so us, OGC, teaming up with W3C, we have a spatial data on the web best practices, using technology like the Open API suite of tools for defining APIs for resource-oriented items. Lots of focus on developer experience, modular building blocks to build it up, open development. We are now developing a set of standards that are listed here as OGC API dash features, coverages, map tiles, processes, and more. And so you see the resource names are very similar to what you saw before. If you're using WFS right now, you want to begin thinking of OGC API features. So that's actually one that's deployed, adopted, and released as an open standard, going through an ISO process right now. Coverages, map tiles, processing are being built through a series of sprints as we speak that happened last year and are continuing into this year. So we get APIs for world content on the web. Okay, let me finish off then with GeoPose. It's proposed for 3D geospatial position orientation of real and digital objects. Sounds like AR, right? And so this standards working group, charter that's now approved, one of the chairs, Christine, is developing the plan based upon the approved charter and moving forward with a series of meetings. They have started their standards working group meetings for GeoPose. It's about defining an interoperable way to expect, visualize, record, and share geospatial position and orientation, so 6 degrees of freedom, of real and virtual objects. And so, you're talking about things that are on the surface of the earth is the focus, not only with lat long, but also then orientation that goes along with that. And so anticipating development or use of a default geographical frame of reference for GeoPose, probably WGS 84. Create a standard data exchange, explore, test practical use cases, and then propose that as a standard consistent with Standards Baseline. So we look forward to GeoPose coming forward here this year with the draft standard and then adopted standard along with implementations. Okay, so here's what I told you. Overlaid or overlaying on top of the ETSI architecture diagram. ARML2, lots of great concepts there for how to pull content together in an AR context. 3D Viz for being able to render that on the fly. Also, I thought about pushing the graphics into the hardware section up there, right? Because you are using GPUs and the like in that area. So 3D Viz based upon GLTF, I3S, and 3D tiles. World knowledge, getting that content. You're not going to build all that content for your AR experience. You're going to want to be able to pull that in and render it based upon semantics and syntax and world coordinate reference systems and APIs. And then GeoPose to have a generally interoperable, shareable way of identifying the pose of a device in the real world. So I'll leave you with the list of standards. I'll also invite you to come to the TC, the OGC Technical Committee and Working Group meetings. We will be in Ottawa in March. We were going to be in Hong Kong. We scrambled and we're now in Ottawa in March. We'll be in Montreal again. We'll be back in Montreal. There will be, in particular, in Montreal in June at the TC meeting, a future direction session on immersive geo XR. This is consistent with where I started with a priority trend for OGC in 2020 is augmented reality immersive geo. Munich in September, back in the United States in December. Go to ogcmeet.org. You'll get a lot more information. That's what I have for you today. I hope that was useful, informative, and maybe some questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, George. I think we'll leave, if you don't mind, we'll leave that beautiful graphic on the screen. If somebody wants, they can get your contact information and follow up with you. So yes, it's great to have a couple questions. I see that one question is around the 3D portrayal or the 3D representations. I have a question, which is what happened to 3D portrayal? Not mentioned, but the question that was asked by Neil is, are I3S and 3D tiles complementary or competitive to each other?
And the answer is yes.
Good.
In the sense of, yeah, they started out from different organizations with slightly different designs. They do both support GLTF. They do have some differences, and there's also been activities, in particular around the 3D portrayal activity that you just mentioned, Christine, to identify ways, suggestions for harmonization. They are both still community standards at this point. I think that it's an open question still, quite frankly, to see what the marketplace is going to do with respect to these both very good standards and specifications. A couple of years ago, OGC took the perspective, of winner takes some. This is a theme that comes out in software. Really good, actually, article by that exact name in the communications of the ACM a couple of years ago. Winner takes some. In software, we're not in a Betamax, VHS kind of mindset where, hardware fixes us to something that can't change rapidly. We're in a world of software, and so people, are very agile. They look at multiple specifications, things change quickly. And so that's why we changed in OGC to allow these community standards to come into the tent, if you will, for discussion. And see where it goes. And quite frankly, we're right now in the discussion of where's it going to go.
Right, and that's an opportunity, as Josh has mentioned here in the chat, to speak about, if you wouldn't mind, George, the 3D data containers and tiles API, the pilot that's currently started a couple months ago.
Yeah, right. So we do have a 3D containers pilot. I didn't speak as much in this webinar about things that are under development in the innovation program. I encourage you to come look. They are not adopted standards, right? So I focused on the adopted standards here. But the 3D tiles container standards in particular, another standard I didn't mention simply because of time, is GeoPackage. So that is a SQLite container for any kind of geospatial information. And we're rapidly adding extensions to the base GeoPackage standard. GeoPackage been adopted, it's out there, it's operational around the globe. Adding the 3D tiles aspect to it is currently under development, and we look forward to that becoming an extension approved in GeoPackage here in the near future.
So who participates in the pilots, and is that different than the people who participate in the standards program?
So anybody can participate in the pilots, anybody can participate in the standards programs, but they're two different activities. And you got to be a member to participate in the OGC pilots. And you can be any level of member to do that in the innovation program and the like. In the standards program, in the SWIGs, you must be a member, but we then release that information, as we do with the engineering reports coming out of the innovation program, to the public. So there is certain areas that require membership and get involved, and a lot of that is driven by the intellectual property agreements to say you will not submit patented material without telling us, to prevent us from releasing a standard that has a submarine patented item in it. So we work hard with respect to membership to, as best we can, ensure that the released open standards are unencumbered by any patents. And so, a big driver for membership are those obligations. And so when you pick up an OGC standard, you can have very high assurance that the intellectual property allows you to use it without those issues.
So just to clarify, it's free access to all OGC standards, and for the present, there's no fee to use the specification, neither to a patent holder nor to the OGC itself.
None of our standards require a license fee. None of them are encumbered with any patents that we know of that would require, that are essential patents, that, in the sense of you're required to make use of patented technology in order to use the standard. Those are
and
key.
Certification, though, is a fee-based system?
So certification, in the compliance program, anybody can test using the harness, the test harness. So we've deployed a test harness with a script-based environment where anybody can test against the harness with their implementation. If you want your test results to be certified, somebody to examine your results and certify that they are, in fact, represent a valid certification against the OGC testing suite, you pay a fee for that.
Great. I see that there's another question about the support of OGC standards in web browsers. So,
Yep. Okay.
how would you answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So 50 million servers, many of which are WMS and WMTS, are readily interoperable in a browser, right? I mean, that's kind of what they were designed for. Going beyond that, because those are the existing OGC web services that are defined 20 years ago. Working with the W3C on the spatial data on the web best practices. That's an existing published document. It's a best practice for OGC. It's a recommendation from W3C. It says how to do spatial data on the web. And so some really good practices about how to set up your environment. That has been a driver for our API development as well as some of our other activities. One of the things about GeoPackage built on SQLite, every browser supports SQLite, so you can pull that in, natively support that. The APIs themselves then are, spatial data on the web enabled, if you will. So very high support browsers. Yeah.
Do you know of any collaborations between the Immersive Web working group of the W3C and any OGC standards activities? So the Immersive Web.
The funnel, if you will, between W3C and OGC is the spatial data on the web interest group. And so any W3C activities, the guy in particular, Ted Guild on the W3C staff, wants to work through that. And so as new items come up about Immersive Web, about transportation, about graph query languages, the focus is on that integration group, interest group, IG. And so, yes, we interact with essentially all of W3C, but through the spatial data on the web interest group.
Thank you. One last question. You briefly mentioned something you called the OGC Standards Baseline. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, sure. So it's a controlled term for one, so we have a definition of what baseline means. And it is all of the specifications that have been approved through the OGC standards process. And so it's a set of documents that have gone through that open consensus process and approval. And they're all on our website, OGC Standards. And so you can go see those. And so that's our baseline. And we use that to set the stage, but also the launch point for innovation. We recognize that the baseline is always moving. We also recognize the baseline reflects a lot of knowledge that has been developed over the years. And so how do we both maintain the baseline while facing the innovator's dilemma of going beyond or deprecating the baseline? So the OGC Web Services and the new OGC APIs are the quintessential example of we've got a baseline, we're going to go beyond it. How do we manage that, recognizing that there's 50 million servers out there, data sets?
Yeah, and you also might mention, for those who are not familiar with the OGC, the domain working groups, and give a few examples of those.
Yeah, appreciate that, Christine. Yeah, so within the standards program, we have two kinds of working groups, standards working groups and domain working groups. So, for example, GeoPose is a standards working group. It has a charter to develop a standard with a given scope and a schedule that goes along with that, and the outcome is a standard, so it's a standards working group. A domain working group is much more open. Standards working groups, you must opt in given the intellectual property considerations. Again, signing up to the rules that go along with developing a standard with no encumbrances, IP encumbrances, is all behind a SWIG. A domain working group is essentially a discussion group. It's wide open, public mailing lists, and they tend to focus on broader areas than an individual standards working group. So there is, for example, a 3D information management DWIG. The 3DIM DWIG is a really broad working group for discussing anything having to do with 3D information management in a geospatial context. And their function really is to bring in discussions have discussions about, where is that domain going? Is there a need for standards in that domain? Should we charter a new SWIG out of the domain working group? So each of the SWIGs belongs to one or more DWIGs, domain working groups, and the domain working groups are really the a big part of our community process to have discussions about anything geospatial in the various domains.
Okay. Yeah, one question about the DWIG. I know the point cloud DWIG was working or has contemplated a point clouds SWIG. Point clouds in augmented reality are, well, in many domains, pretty fundamental, and we know that there's a lot of innovation, and it's very, very choppy out there, very fragmented. Is there a movement to working towards a standard, a point cloud standard?
Yeah, so there is, as you say, a point cloud domain working group right now, and that is a discussion group for everything related to point clouds, LiDAR and otherwise. It has endorsed the adoption of the ASPRS LAS standard as an OGC community standard. And so similar to 3D tiles and I3S, LAS from ASPRS is an OGC community standard for interoperability around point clouds. The additional discussions in the point cloud DWIG have, should we do more? What should LAS consider to do more? This is a discussion in coordination with ASPRS. What are the points of pain in LAS that could be changed through edits and the like? And so that's a discussion, but there's also other point cloud standards. There's a testing committee that has E287, something like that, ASTM, and other point cloud standards. There's a point cloud in HDF specification that's been reviewed in the point cloud working group. At this point, there is not the development of a charter for a point cloud SWIG, but stay tuned. Given that whole discussion in the domain working group, it could happen pretty quick.
Great. All right, thank you. Well, I don't think we have any more questions from our participants. This has been a very valuable webinar. Thank you, George, and thanks to everybody. We'll definitely post the archive on the page on the AREA website.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.